So hi. So coming to the next one, expenses. So till now we discussed what is meant by asset and what is meant by liability. So asset is nothing but it is an economic resource controlled by the entity, created based on the past events and providing some economic benefits to the entity in future. Is called as what asset. And these are classified into the two types and which are realizable into the cash or providing the benefits to the entity within 1 year are covered under current assets and other than current assets are classified under non-current assets. And based on the tangibility, those are classified into two types. One is the tangible assets, another one is intangible assets. And we discussed what is meant by liability also. And I think but it is an obligation to the entity created based on the past events and results in outflow of some economic resources in future from the entity. So these are classified into two types. One is the current liability and another one is non-current liability. And liability which required to pay within 1 year are covered under current, other than that covered under non-current liability. And we also define the liability as it is treated as the claim of the outsider over the total assets. Claim of the outsider over the total assets. Okay. And these what we discussed till now. And coming to the next one, expenses. Expenses defined as the amount spent for receiving the services or at the time of purchase of the goods. For receiving the services or at the time of purchase of the goods, and for which the benefits are received within that year. Benefits are received within that year. And remember, no future economic benefits will get in case of expenses. Means, for example, rent paid to the landlord. So, how we pay the rent? After utilization of the building, we pay the rent. And here, the benefits already we received, and later we make the payment. And no future benefits will get it. And even salaries also paid to the employees after receiving the services. And so, any amount to spend at the time of receiving the services, at the time of receiving the services, or at the time of purchase of the goods, and it means while transporting the goods from one place to another place, and whatever the transit insurance involved. So these all thing at the time of purchase of the goods or at the time of receiving the services, whatever the amount spent is said to be about expense. And these expenses are providing the benefits within 1 year. These expenses are providing the benefits within 1 year, within that year only. And no future economic benefits will be received in case of expenses. As said, if any economic benefits will be provided in future, and those are treated as a asset. If no future economic benefits will get, and those are treated as a expense. Okay. So example, so rent paid, salaries paid, freight incurred. These are all covered under the definition of an expense. Okay. And second, next one, income. And what is meant by income? What is meant by income? Income is nothing but amount received by the entity amount received by the entity by way of sale of goods or by providing these services. Amount received by the entity by way of sale of goods or by providing the services are covered under the definition of what? Income. Okay. So, for example, we provided consultancy services relating to the education, and in return we get what? Commission, and that is said to be about income. So, and we sell the product, we sell the goods to the another party. In return, we receive the cash. That is said to be about sales and is nothing but what? Income. So, any amount received by the entity by way of sale of goods or by way of providing these services or by way of providing these services are covered under definition of what? Income. Nothing but what? For example, commission received, interest received. So, interest received or sale of goods, etc. These are treated as what? Income. So, amount spent for receiving the services or at the time of purchase of the goods covered under expense, and amount received by the entity by way of sale of goods or by way of providing the services are covered under the definition of what? Income. Definition of what? Income. And generally there are two words are there in normal scenario. We use these words normally. One is the revenue, another one is the income. What is the difference between these two? So revenue stands for what? Income stands for what? Is there any difference or both are same? Generally, revenue stands for amount received by the entity. So, in the normal course of business operations or in the ordinary course of business operations are said to be about revenue. And it means if the entity is dealing with the trading of the good, by sale of the goods, how much amount they received is said to be a revenue. Entity is relating to the transportation sector, and by way of providing the transportation service, how much amount they received, that is said to be about revenue. But the income is nothing but the total amount received by the entity is said to be about income, either by doing the core business activity or non-core business activity. Either it happened in the normal course of business operations or not. Everything is said to be about income. Okay. So revenue generally stands for what? Amount received by the entity, amount received by the entity by way of doing the core business activity, by way of doing the core business activity. And these are normally happened in the ordinary course of business operations, like sale of goods in case of trading, in case of trading. But coming to the income, the total amount received by the entity either by doing the core business activity or non-core business activity are said to be a what? Income. Amount received by the entity either by doing the core business activity or non-core business activity. Core business activity, non-core business. For example, in case of trading concern, in case of trading concern, Sale of the good is said to be a core business activity. And in the current year, we sell the product and we get around 10 lakh. And out of that, around 6 lakh we spend for further expansion purpose. And the remaining 4 lakh we deposited in the bank. On the deposited amount, we'll get what? Interest. That interest amount is said to be a what? Non-core business activity. So that is also covered under what? Income. So any amount received by the entity, either it is relating to the operations of the entity, operations of the business or not. Either it happened either in ordinary course of business operations or not. That is said to be about income. But amount received by way of doing the core business activity, nothing but in the ordinary course of business operations is said to be about revenue. Is said to be about revenue. So here, for example, sale of goods is said to be a income and interest received is also said to be an income. So either by doing the core business activity or by doing non-core business activity, that is covered under what? Income. But only by doing core business activity, whatever the amount will get is said to be about revenue. Is said to be about revenue. So this is what is meant by revenue and what is meant by income. I hope you guys understood. Okay. Next. Fifth one, capital. And in general scenario, capital is defined as simply the amount brought by the owner into the business is said to be about capital. The amount brought by the owner into the business is called as what? Capital. Is called as what? Capital. Or it may be defined as it is the residual interest. It is the residual interest over the assets after reduction of all liabilities. It is the residual interest over the assets after reduction of the liability. And it simply is nothing but what? If you consider total assets, out of that, if you reduce the liability, the remaining balance is defined as what? Capital. So capital simply is nothing but the difference between total assets minus liability. As we discussed previously, on the total assets, so on the total assets, two parties are having the claim. One is the owner and another one is the outsider. One is the owner, another one is the outsider. The outsider's claim over the asset is called as what? Liability. And the owner's claim over the asset is called as what? Capital. Is called as what? Capital. What is the owner's claim? The residual portion of the assets available after meeting the liability. After meeting the all outsiders claim is called as what? Capital. So the owner's claim over the total assets after adjusting the liabilities is treated as what? Capital, and is defined as it is the residual interest over the assets after reduction of all liability. So capital is defined as what? Total assets minus liabilities. Total assets minus liabilities. Okay. So this is what is meant by capital. Okay. So we discussed what is meant by expense and what is meant by income and what is meant by capital. And one more item is there is nothing but what? Drawings. Is nothing but what? Drawings. What is meant by drawings? Drawing stands for any amount withdraw by the owner for his personal purpose or for his domestic purpose is said to be about drawings. So anything withdraw by the owner for his personal purpose or domestic or household purpose. For example, owner withdraw the amount for payment towards his children's tuition fee. That is said to be about rights. Amount withdraw by the owner for payment of his tax liability to the government. That is said to be about drawings. And amount withdraw by the owner for his household purpose is said to be about drawing. Or for purchase of the gold for his wife. That is said to be about drawings. So anything withdraw by the owner for his personal purpose simply is nothing but what drawing. Here, anything is nothing but in terms of cash or in terms of goods or in terms of assets. Anything withdraw by the owner for his personal purpose or domestic purpose or household purpose is it treated as a what? Drawings. Is it treated as a what? Drawings. Okay. So these are the few definitions relating to the accounting and what is meant by expense, what is meant by income, and what is meant by capital and drawings. Okay. I hope you guys understood.